All right, good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to our second webinar in collaboration with Nectar in Australia, a deep dive into the Open Science Framework. My name is Courtney Soderberg. I'm the Stats and Methods Consultant here at the Center for Open Science. And for those of you who attended the webinar 2 weeks ago, this is kind of going to go over some of the features of the OSF in more depth. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through kind of how to use the OSF for some more complicated project structures, such as classroom use cases for teaching about reproducibility, as well as setting up lab groups that can also be extended to setting up things like multi-site projects. And we're also going to talk about some smaller features of the OSF that can really help to increase its potential for collaboration, like setting up notifications for commenting and changes to projects, and working with new dashboard and tags to help make it easier to find your different projects. So just to go over quickly how to interact through the Hangout, there should be a Q&A widget that you can use to open up a question and answer pane on the side of your screen. You can use this to ask questions plus one other people's questions. If for some reason you're having trouble with the Q&A pane, you can always email us at contact@cos.io. We'll be monitoring that. So if you send in questions that way, you should be able to get them into the webinar. I'll be copying them over as they come in. Right. So just to give a quick overview, in case some of you were not at the previous webinar, the OSF was built in part to help connect all the pieces and parts of the scientific workflow. So right now, the way science is currently done, most typically we just see the published report that is put out. And so what this means is that we're missing whole parts of the scientific workflow. And this is making reproducibility a lot harder because there's a lot of information that is in these different early parts. And when we don't record that information, or we do record it but don't link it up to the publication, we're missing a lot of information. And so one of the things the OSF was built to do was to make it easy for researchers to start documentation from the beginning and connect up the pieces and parts of their workflow, so that when that is made public, scientists, readers of the research, collaborators can get a better sense of how the research was done and better access to that documentation. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and switch over to the OSF very quickly. All right. So as those of you who were on the webinar 2 weeks ago may notice, the dashboard on the OSF looks a little bit different than it did 2 weeks ago. We had a release that did a major UI change to the dashboard. So I'm just quickly going to go through that before going into some of the specific topic areas we're going to cover today. So this is the dashboard. I see the last 10 projects that I was working on, so I can quickly access those, or I can search through all of my projects if I know the name that I want. If I want a kind of more detailed view, I can click on My Projects. And this will take me to something that looks a little bit like the old project organizer, but actually has a lot more information in it. So once it fetches all of my projects, I have a lot, then I can start looking through for particular ones that I might want. Right now they're arranged by date last modified, but I'm actually going to start with a class demo. So if I click on this, I'm taken to my project. So one of the things that we had talked about before is setting up one individual project on the OSF. In the example we used a few weeks ago, that was a particular experiment. So oftentimes people will ask, how do you create kind of broader structures on the site? And so I'm going to start by talking about using OSF in the classroom to teach about reproducibility, as I think this illustrates the idea of broader projects well as is something that we've seen many other researchers use to work with their students. So there's a group in the US at Haverford College called Project Tier. And so they have developed a couple of protocols for teaching students about kind of reproducibility and replicability and how to build a workflow that has all the pieces and parts that you would need to reproduce analyses. So teaching them about, metadata, about version control, about raw versus clean data files, all that good stuff. And so this is their website. One of the things they actually have their students do is not only teach them about the files they need to use, but also teach them how to store those files, right? We know that keeping clean, organized storage of files related to research is one big problem. And so they have a couple of different ways that professors can go about teaching this to their students, one of which is using a template on the OSF. So if we go to the project tier demo project that Richard and Norm have set up, you can see that they have all their protocols as well as demonstration projects for how they like their students to organize their materials. So using this as kind of a basic place to start, we can take this and apply it to a whole class. So where we'll often see the OSF used in classrooms is when there's a class project that either a particular student or groups of students need to submit for the class. And so professors are particularly interested in how do their students give them all those materials in an efficient fashion? And also, how do they get their students to learn good principles of kind of setting up a workflow and documenting their work? And so what we'll often suggest is to have them set up an OSF project for the class. So it's given a title just related to the class. And in the wiki, if I expand this, you can see that I've actually given the students on my project an explanation of what this project is about. So this is a demo project for the class. And what I'm asking the students to do is actually go to a project that I, as the instructor, have created. So if I go down to this project template, this is a sub-project. So I created this by clicking Add Component, giving it a category of project, and then saying Class Template. I'm not actually going to recreate it right now, but if I go into it, what you'll see is that it has the sections that I would like my students to fill out. So I would like them to keep a section for their output, their analyses, their data, and their methods. And if I go into any of these particular sections, it has instructions for the students about what files they should put in these, how I'd like them to be labeled, the file formats, things like that. I could just put this in a syllabus for the class, but I've actually put it in the wiki for a particular reason, which I'll show you right now. So in the wiki for the class, if I go back here and go to read more, the example wiki, it says for the students in the class, go to the project template, and then click on the duplicate button and fork the project. So if I follow the hyperlink, I'm inside the class project template. If I click on this little duplicate button, it's going to give me two options. I can template or I can fork. So I'm actually going to fork this project. So if I click fork, what this is going to do is it will create a perfect copy of that other project. So it's going to bring with it the structure. So I have all the components, and I also have the content of the wiki, but I am the only contributor on it. So this is my own personal project. So the reason as an instructor that I had put those instructions to my students in the wiki was so that when they create their own project for the class, they have a reminder inside the project of what they should be putting in it as they do their own class projects. You don't have to put this content, as I said. This could just be in the syllabus, but if you want to give students an extra reminder of, hey, this is how you should be using this section of the project, this is what I expect to see here, you can put that in the wiki so that it follows them as they create their projects. When the student has their own project, they can change the title to whatever it needs to be for their particular class project. So for example, the effect of chocolate on caffeine levels. And then I can also upload my own personal materials. So forking brings all the content, but I still have editing power over it. So I can go into the wiki, which says, this is a template. When you start your project, you should change the wiki to include more specific information. I can delete all this and add my own personal research question, for example. Caffeine levels increase. So because I'm the only contributor on this project right now, my instructor and my teaching assistant would not be able to see into this project. So if I go to the project this was forked from, the class project template, I go back to the class and I actually read the instructions that I was given in the wiki. It says that I have to do two other things. I need to add the instructor and the TA as non-bibliographic contributors on my project. And I need to use the add link button to link it back up to this class. So I have my own personal project. I'm going to add Sarah Bowman so that as the teaching assistant, she can see my project. And add her as read write. I'm going to give her access to all of my project so she can see as I make headway on my project. And I'm going to add her as a non-bibliographic contributor. So I'm going to uncheck this box. So what that means is that when I look at my project, I'm still the only contributor, but Sarah now has access to this. So Sarah will have gotten an email saying I added her to this project. And so if Sarah is the TA for all the students in the class, she will have gotten a ping from every single student in the class telling her that she's been added to their project. She will be able to see all of the different files that they upload. She'll be able to check them so she can grade it. And she'll also be able to check whether they're following the instructions of how we wanted the project structured. So the last thing as a student that I need to do is actually link it back into the class project. So as a TA, Sarah could go and hunt down every single project individually, but it might be easier for her if all of the projects from different students related to this class were housed in one particular area. So I can do that by using this add link button. So if I click on this and search for chocolate, I'll search my projects. When I add a link, what that's going to do is it's going to tie the two projects together. So you'll now see it appears here. So this chocolate and caffeine project is tied to this class demo project. I can undo the link if I want by removing it. I can link this caffeine project to multiple different other projects on the OSF, so it's not actually nested. They're just tied together slightly so that if Sarah, as a TA, goes to this OSF class demo project, she will see all the projects that are linked to that on which she is a contributor. And so it makes it easier for the teaching assistants and for the professor to see all the different students' projects. But the students can't see into each other's project. So for example, for the caffeine project, I am the only contributor along with Sarah. So this other student who is not a contributor on my project could not see in it. And so by taking advantage of the ability to fork and template OSF projects, we can set up a structure that we want students to use to help start to teach them about how to efficiently structure and manage their own files and data related to class projects, and hopefully have them take that forward into the work that they're doing. So does anyone have any questions about what I went through in terms of setting up a class project on the OSF, or more broadly about the forking and linking capabilities that I went through? You're going to see them again when I talk about a lab, but if you have any particular questions about them right now, let me know and I'll be happy to answer them. All right, so we can take the idea of kind of an overarching higher level project in terms of a class and also apply that to other situations where we might want to have a broader structure over a set of projects. In particular, we can think about when we might want to create a lab. So when we think about creating web pages for labs, for example, or creating a space on a server for a lab, that can be used for a couple of different reasons. Especially in a lab web page, we're often trying to showcase the work a lab is doing to the outside world. So we want to showcase who the PIs and graduate students and postdocs in a lab are. We want to showcase the work that's going on. We maybe want to give people access to different resources that the lab has created, such as preprints or maybe some analysis scripts or data sets if we're trying to share those as well. On a server bank, though, oftentimes we're thinking about kind of resources that are more internally focused. This could be things like records about the types of training people have had and the certifications they have. It could be information about standing operating procedures of the lab, or things like IRB protocols and lab data management plans. And so what we can do is try and use OSF projects to create lab spaces in the OSF that can serve both of those functions. So both an outward-facing function of letting people outside of our lab know all the different research that's going on, and also helping to collate the lab material in a place that lab members will have access to no matter where they are. So just like our class project, we're going to have an overarching OSF lab project. And what I've done is I've split this into a couple of different sections. So just like in the class, I've created a lab template project. Not everyone does this with their lab. I like to, whenever I'm talking through setting up a lab project for people, because especially when we think of trying to kind of increase the reproducibility of work, a big part of that is just making sure that we can find everything. So the more consistent we as individuals can be across different projects in terms of the structure we set up, as well as the more consistent we can be in terms of the project structure we use within a lab, the easier it's going to be to look back a couple of years or look at kind of other lab members' projects and try to find things, because we know that everybody's going to have their data in the same place. Everyone is going to have their methods in the same place. Everyone's going to have their analyses in the same place. And so I tend to like to set up a lab project template to kind of remind everyone this is the basic structure we use for all projects in this lab, as well as these are the types of materials that we as a lab like to save. This can be especially useful if your lab has a particular data management plan or data management policy. What you can actually do is set up a project that has the structure that you specified in your data management plan. That is how you're going to manage your data. And just like with the class project, if I wanted to, I could put instructions in the wiki about what sorts of data I was supposed to save, how those files were supposed to be stored. So having the pieces of the data management plan put into the wiki so that every time I create a new project, I see those instructions as a memory check for myself. So I have my lab project template. I also have a section called Lab Resources. So I mentioned that, sometimes we might have some internal resources we want, like data management plans, IRB protocols, lab member certifications, and standard operating procedures. And I can put any files under here I want. So this project is pretty blank. It doesn't have any files in it, but I wanted to show it because if you'll notice on the right, some of these components are private and some of these are public. So the project template and the lab resources are completely private. What that means is only myself, Brian Nosek, and April Kleiber and Sharon, who are standing in as my lab mates in this example, can see into them. However, this lab research component is public. Anyone can see into that. And so what I've done is I've actually linked in an experiment or it's an example from a workshop, but it's an experiment that I am the contributor on. And so if anybody who was not a member of the lab viewed this project, so I can actually log out and view that project again, what they'll see is they'll see a description of my lab. This one's pretty short, but I could make that description longer if I wanted to. I could put in pictures of the different lab members. I could even give them each, if I really wanted to, a wiki page where I would have a wiki for each of my lab members where they could have a picture and a description of themselves. And you'll notice, because I'm not signed in as one of these contributors, I can't see that lab project template and I can't see those lab resources. So I don't have access to any of the internal information for the lab, but I am able to see the public research that the lab has linked into this page. Right now, it's only one study, but if the lab had linked in, maybe it's a really big lab, it might have linked in 20 different projects, I can look through and get an idea about all the public-facing projects that that lab has by going to this one particular page. So it can function both to showcase all the research that a lab is doing, as well as collate all those lab materials. So I'm going to sign back in now. I can type in my password correctly. There we go. Right. So when I go to link in projects, just to tell you a little bit more about how links work, this workshop example project it's linked into this lab example, but it's its own independent project. So for example, if I go inside this component, I can delete this link, I can remove it. But if I remove the link, It doesn't show up in this project anymore, but my workshop example project still exists. So the link is really just a pointer. I can recreate the link. And I can have this particular workshop example project linked to multiple places. So for example, I'm the only contributor on this project, but maybe I had a collaborator who was in a different lab. So maybe Tim Arrington, one of my coworkers, collaborated on this project with me. If we both wanted to showcase this project on our personal lab web pages, I could link it to my lab web page or my lab OSF project, and Tim could also link it to his OSF lab project. So links kind of allow you a flexible way to create these broader structures on top of individual projects. And because you can uncouple links and recreate them, they allow you to move around these structures. So I'm going to take a moment to take some questions. All right. So Andrew asked, are you exploring integration with learning management systems? Andrew, could you tell me a little bit more what you mean by that? If you're thinking about particular learning management systems, or if you're thinking about learning management systems in the sort of sense of, short courses that allow for people to kind of ask questions, do short quizzes, things like that. Or am I misinterpreting the question? Right. While I'm getting a little bit of clarification on that from Andrew, I did want to mention, when I clicked on this duplicate button, right, last time I forked, I kind of completely ignored this template. So I'm going to show you the difference because both of them are useful, but they do have slightly different use cases. So if I go into my lab project template, in the class example, my template actually had a bunch of content in it, right? It had some stuff written in the wiki. It had in the overall wiki and the data wiki. Forking is going to copy over all that content. So it will copy any files you have, any content in the wiki, it'll copy folders, it'll copy component structures. That can be really nice if the wiki is being used for either giving people instructions or if those files are something that you want to reuse. So for example, if you're building off somebody else's project, maybe they collected a bunch of data, did some analyses, and you want to extend the analyses they did, you could fork their project. That would bring over the data and the analyses, and then you could add on your additional information to that. So if I click on the duplicate button, there's another option, which is templating. Templating is a little bit simpler. All it's going to do is it's going to copy the structure. So it's not going to copy over files. It's not going to copy over wiki content. So if I template this, I click create, it's just purely going to copy the structure. And so templating can be good for if you have come up with a structure for OSF projects that you like, that works for you, and you just want to be able to efficiently create new projects without having to build that structure up from the beginning every single time. Templating will allow you to really quickly create a new project with the same structure, but it won't bring over any files or wiki content. Right. So, all right. So Andrew's talking about learning services like, for example, Blackboard. We don't currently have integrations with Blackboard or any other learning management systems. So the reason I was manually structuring class projects for every student is that, so we use Blackboard at one of the institutions that I did my undergraduate research at. And so you could deposit files for the instructors to grade, but what they didn't do is things like version control of those files, and they didn't really keep them in any sort of kind of, the instructor couldn't see how you were organizing your files. So on my personal computer, the files could have been in some sort of horrible organization. I could have had terrible version control. I could have had, 50 different data files all in one big folder on my computer, and then just uploaded one for the instructor. So they're never going to actually be able to see into any of my process or any of my documentation, or get a sense of how I was kind of doing the metadata of those files. It's really, the Blackboard is just there to allow me to get my files to the instructor for grading. So on the class project, because I give the teaching assistant and the teacher access to my personal project, that is a way for me to hand off the files to them. But because I, as an instructor, can set up how I would like their project to be structured, I can require them to work in the system. So what that means is I'm telling them, hey, this is how you get me your files, but also this is how I expect you to be working on these files. So this is the file management that I would like you to use through the life of the project. I can specify that I expect to see, versions of these things changing as I ask the students to maybe make changes after a critique I have with them. And I expect those versions to be done under version control. I can also do things like have my students link in their GitHub repositories. So going back to this example, if maybe I am teaching my students Git and having them, rather than do their analyses and upload their analysis code to the OSF proper, I might say, I would like you to create a private GitHub repository that has your code and shows me that you understand how to version code in GitHub. But rather than being added to, 50 different private GitHub repositories, I'll just ask my students to link in a particular GitHub repo to that project. So I could have them add the test study, and then I would be able to see that GitHub repository in the analysis section. So it's a way both to hand off files, but to also help teach the students the management of those files as they go through the scientific workflow in a tool that after they leave university, they'll have access to, rather than Blackboard, which usually is something that's just at that university and just used within a student-teacher relationship, rather than that's something that is used in the broader lab context to help organize files. Does that make sense, Andrew? All right, so I've been talking a lot about creating kind of these broader structures. We talked during the last webinar about how to create projects, so I haven't necessarily been going through of exactly how you would create these from scratch. I did just want to mention, because the dashboard has changed a little bit from what you may be used to, if I go here, I can click this green Create Project button, give my project a title. So I could call this maybe Soderbergh Lab, create, go to it. And just like any project on the OSF, it starts out in this very bare format. So if this was just going to be a particular experiment, I could add a component for data. However, if this is going to be a lab project, I can add a lab project template. Call it a project, and then start creating my subcomponents underneath there. And then go into my template and add data, for example. So you can see that when we talk about projects, exactly what a project is very flexible. The top level could be a lab. We have one group where the top project, rather than being a lab, is a research project that is a large-scale project that has many different collection sites. So each collection site gets its own sub-project so that they can upload their data, they can upload their scripts, but they're all kept separately from each other for organizational purposes. All right, so before I change gears a little bit, I just wanted to make sure that everyone kind of understood how you could create these higher level projects like lab groups, large research conglomerations, or classes on the OSF, and then use that forking and that templating function to help increase consistency across the different projects and connect different related projects together. All right, great. So I wanted to talk a little bit about some kind of smaller features on the OSF that can really help increase the ability to allow people to collaborate on the site. So I'm going to use the workshop example for this. So if I'm collaborating with Tim, ideally I want him to be aware of what I'm doing and I want a way to communicate with him. So if I go to the settings for this project, there's an option about commenting and email notifications. So if you'll notice on the side of a project, I can click on this comment tab and it opens up a commenting pane. So right now, the project is public. So if I make comments, anybody can see them. So I could say, you know, have you thought about running this study in another country for a cross-cultural sample? So there are two things I wanted to mention. The first is how you actually get notifications about when things are happening on your project, either people commenting or people uploading files. So if I go to settings, I can go down to email notifications. So as a default, you will never get emails from the OSF if people make comments or they upload files on projects. You may want to change this though if you don't want to have to manually look at the projects to see if anything has happened. So that email notification section is where you can change that. So I can go in and I have options to either get notifications instantly or daily if somebody's made comments, as well as if somebody has updated files on the system. So I'm going to change these both to daily, which means that at the end of the day, if somebody other than me had commented, obviously I'm not going to get an email about my own comment, but let's say that Tim replied to me, at the end of the day, I would get a notification letting me know that, to let me more passively get updates about my project. For public projects, I also might want to open the project up a little bit to get feedback from the community. So if I go to my settings tab, there's also a way I can set the commenting. By default, only contributors can make comments on OSF projects. But I can change that so that when the project is public, any OSF user can post comments. And so for particular projects, if I want that more community engagement piece, if I want to be able to have a back and forth with people about my projects in the same location that the files about my project live, then I can switch that setting so that anybody can comment. They have to be logged in because all the commenting is identified. There's no anonymous commenting. But as long as somebody has an OSF account, if that box is checked, then they'll be able to comment on the project, and you can have a back and forth with them that will be viewable to anyone who views the public project. The project has commenting, and every individual file also has commenting. So if I wanted to make comments about this particular R script, for example, or if somebody wanted to give me ideas about how I might make this R script more efficient, or maybe note that I don't have commenting in it and maybe I should do that because they can't quite understand my script, they can comment directly on that file. Another thing I wanted to talk about is how to increase the discoverability of projects on the OSF. So when we talk about making work, we can think about discoverability in two different ways. One is how to make work discoverable once we make it public, right? So we mentioned when I was talking about the lab projects, the idea of part of the reason that people create lab websites or lab projects is to showcase the work that their lab is doing. They want other people to know about it. They want this to be findable and searchable. But I also want to make it easier to navigate through my own projects in terms of figuring out, what are all the projects I did with a particular collaborator, or what are the projects that I did on particular topics. And so one way to increase the discoverability of projects, both for myself and for other people, is to take advantage of the tags on the OSF. So I can tag a project, I can tag a component, I can tag an individual file. And a tag, I can type in anything I want. So I could say chocolate. All of my example research projects are chocolate related. I could say reproducibility. I can give it as many tags as I want. And the tag is just a way for me to, you can kind of think of them as keywords to give to the project. These are important because tags are indexed in the search. So if I go to search and search for everything related to chocolate on the site, it will bring up files that have chocolate tags or that are named chocolate. It will also bring up components and projects that have chocolate in the name or have tags related to that. So if I look at just the projects, then I will start to see projects that have either chocolate in the name or have been tagged thusly. So might be that that project is not public. It's not on the first page. So depending on how many times the word appears, that will change the search results. So if I looked for, it'll also give me information about how I might improve my search. So I could add demo, and that will give me a more refined search. Search only indexes public projects though. So if the workshop project had been private, there's no way it would have ever come up in the search. So if I want to be able to search through my own private projects, I have to do that in a slightly different way. So if I go to my projects, This is the new project organizer. So if you've been playing around on the site a couple weeks ago, this is going to look different. Some of it should look similar, but some of it is a little bit different. So what I'm given is a list of all of my projects. There are a couple ways that I can kind of group my projects together organizationally in ways that make sense. And one of those is to create collections. So I've created 2 collections, and I actually have a third one of which is workshop projects. So if I look at this, it shows me all the projects that I have decided are related to the workshops I do. I can add other projects by dragging and dropping them into the collection. And so this is just an internal organization. No one else is ever going to see what projects I have deemed as workshop projects. It's just a way for me to kind of quickly filter types of projects that I think are related to each other. So I have my workshop projects. I tend to create a collection for projects that I am kind of actively working on to make it easy to find them. And I can always create new collections by clicking this plus and giving it any sort of name I want. So for example, I might call this one example projects. And then I can delete collections by just deleting. That won't delete any of the projects, it'll just delete that organizational wrapper. So apart from collections, another way to kind of search through my projects is to use these filters on the side. So what these will do is it will show me the subset of projects that fit the filters. So for example, I can ask for what are the projects that have Sarah Bowman as a contributor. And I can string these together. So what are the projects I have with Sarah Bowman and Andrew Salins? You'll see that it got even smaller. I can take Andrew off, and I can use those tags to combine with my contributor filter. So what are the projects that I have with Sarah Bowman as a contributor with an OSF tag? And that gets really specific. I can also string tags together. So I could say, what are the projects I have with a workshop tag and a Rutgers tag? So tagging my projects to kind of give me more information about what they're on can really help me when I'm on my project dashboard to filter down projects if I'm searching for a particular type of project and it is private. So Andrew had a question, are the tags you just showed user-defined, system-defined, or auto-generated? That's a great question. So right now the tags are user-defined. So for example, if I go into the Soderbergh Lab project, I can type in anything I want and you'll notice that it's not kind of auto-completing the tag. So chocolate doesn't auto-complete a chocolate or make a suggestion. The tags can also be kind of phrases if I really wanted to. Should I count sheep? So the tags themselves are auto-generated. What you'll notice though is if I search for something, so for example, I'm going to search for gender. The search will suggest other tags that might be related to gender. So I could add gender with a capital G or a lowercase g. It's also suggesting that maybe to refine this filter, I add in an IAT tag. So the IAT is a particular psychological task that is often used to measure gender stereotypes. So the tags are user-defined, but the system is kind of keeping track of what tags tend to show up together to help me refine my search. And we have had a couple of requests to try and maybe not necessarily auto-generate tags, but have suggested tags for different disciplinary systems. So a related question, what is the application scope of the user definition? Can they be used in all projects by user or just the project in which they have been defined? All right, so if I understand your question correctly, Andrew, tags can be used in any project. So every single project has this area for tags. So if I go into test, it also has a tag area, and tags also appear on files. So this one has a tag of monkey, which is the tag I always use because it's not used very often anywhere else on the system. So the tags themselves are not defined. They're just a letter string. So I could use a tag that has absolutely no meaning whatsoever. It's just a piece of metadata that's given to that particular project. Let me know if I didn't exactly answer your question, or if you'd like more clarification, and I'd be happy to give it. All right. So I did want to just pause since we're running up on the hour point. I'm going to open it up to questions, either about anything I've covered, or if you thought I was going to cover something and I didn't, please feel free to ask about that and I can try and cover it. Also, after this webinar, please feel free to email me at contact@cos.io or Courtney@cos.io, since you all have my email address, since I had a little bit of trouble with 14-hour time differences, and I'd be happy to answer anything offline. All right, so we've had a couple that come in. So Andrew clarifying his question, if I define a tag in project X, would it also be available for me to use in project Y? So I can use the same tag over and over again. So for example, in graduate school, I did a lot of experiments that involved the IAT task. So I could put IAT on this project. I could also go to my dashboard and go into the Soderbergh Lab project and put IAT here as well. So I can use the same tag over and over for as many projects and components and files as it pertains to. All right, Ryan Fraser had a question. Does any cleaning of tags occur? i.e. somebody may create similar tags or tags that are incorrectly spelled. So right now, no cleaning of tags occurs. The tags are just kind of taken as the user applies them. But I think in the future, we are starting to look at ways that we can kind of harness either metadata schemas or kind of syntax schemas from different disciplines that have actually kind of been defined, and use those to help researchers pick better tags. But right now, as you saw, there were two different tags for gender. One was uppercase and one was lowercase when I was doing the search. So Aggie asked, are the suggested tags coming from the current projects in the OSF globally or just of that user? That's a great question. So the suggested tags in the search are coming from the global public OSF projects. So if I search for IAT, for example, these improvements are related to kind of the total 1,192 results that are coming up, what additional tags might help refine that search a little bit more. So they're over the public projects that are coming up. All right. Um, does anyone else have any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon to attend the webinar, and feel free to email me with questions afterwards. And I hope you all have a lovely afternoon.